Right, so thank you all for being here. Big thanks to SCCAN for putting on this event. I am going to explore what environmental justice means, what environmental injustice looks like in Scotland, and why a human right to a healthy environment could help to further environmental justice. I'm going to talk about a recent important recommendation for a human right to a healthy environment and what ERCS is doing to progress this work. So hopefully this will be food for thought for the discussion later on. But I should caveat here that environmental justice can be explained in about a million different ways. So I'm going to give it my best go, but your ideas may differ, and we can discuss that more in the discussion. So the eagle-eyed of you here will note that what was advertised on the bill was a discussion of climate justice, but in preparation for tonight's event, we realized that environmental justice was perhaps a better fit for Scotland because it encompasses climate change issues, but also issues around nature and biodiversity. So do stick around. If you were just expecting something on climate justice, we will talk about climate change too, I promise. So let's dive straight in. What is environmental justice theory, and what are the similarities with human rights? So I'm going to use a United States definition because this is the clearest articulation of environmental justice that I could find. And this is where the environmental justice has its roots. So as defined by the United States, environmental justice means the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And by fair treatment, we mean that no group of people should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, governmental, and commercial operations or policies. And human rights is where the law protects our basic human needs. So Article 2 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which is one of the most seminal human rights documents, says everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, which at the time didn't include a human right to a healthy environment, but the theory is still important, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. So you can see at the outset the parallels here. Both concepts are rooted in the idea of equal treatment, empowerment in relation to government, and protection against intrusion of our basic needs and dignity. So how does environmental injustice manifest in practice in Scotland? Well, in practice, it happens where there is environmental damage or an environmental issue that harms all of us, but with disproportional impacts on marginalized groups and individuals, which can worsen inequality. Often, these groups have least contributed to the problem, and that is part of the injustice. And often we can see, as a result, either little action or solutions that are not fit for purpose, which can actually serve to further worsen existing inequalities. Right, so that's the general trend, but let's put this in context because generalizations don't mean anything without context. So let's look at air pollution, which in Scotland is primarily caused by road traffic, of which cars make up a majority. And in Scotland, it is at levels which are breaking World Health Organization safety standards in many urban centers. So we know that air pollution impacts us all and shortens all of our lives, but it has a disproportionate impact on unborn babies. It can lead to low birth weights or premature birth. It can impact on children's lung development, and it can also impact on people with pre-existing health conditions, which in Scotland often coincides with people living in areas of highest deprivation. Now, unborn babies, children, and people living in highest deprivation in Scotland, 66% of whom do not have access to a car, have not caused the problem. Solutions have historically included more road building, more lanes for more traffic, rather than a systemic change which focuses on getting the largest amount of people from the largest range of backgrounds around in the cheapest, greenest, fairest way. And this, in Scotland, has perpetuated a cycle of car dependency. It's forced people in financial hardship into car ownership, and underinvestment in public transport and active travel means that some people are stuck in a cycle of transport poverty, unable to access basic services like banks or job centres, which again serves to exacerbate the inequality. And there are so many more examples of environmental injustice. So this is just one, but I'm sure that you'll all have some ideas. The climate crisis and its impact on Scotland's youth who have inherited a problem that they haven't caused. The gas facility at Mossmoran and its impact on the local Cowdenbeath residents. COVID and the fact that not all of us have had as easy access as others to nature, which has been a lifeline for mental and physical health during the pandemic. So I want us to unpack these ideas more during the discussion, but you get the general trend here. And what's important to note is that there's a common thread that runs through environmental injustice wherever we see it. And that is the lack of meaningful involvement of people, especially those impacted by the problem, in the design and implementation of environmental law and policy. This uneven distribution of power leads to a lack of accountability of government in relation to its obligations, which leads to the abuse of power. So what if we put in place legal structures and support to empower citizens, to strengthen accountability and to stop the abuse of power and cement equal protection against environmental damage? We believe at the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland that this would go some way into helping us as a collective community to flip the script and to have fairer and better environmental outcomes. And this is really what human rights seeks to achieve: legal protection to individuals from intrusion by the state in relation to basic fundamental needs. Now, at the time when human rights emerged, the freedoms it was seeking to protect, especially after the Second World War, were civil and political rights, like things like protection from torture, protection from murder at the hands of government. Today, we're at a tipping point with the environment, which is why we so desperately need a human right to a healthy environment. So I want us now to have a more detailed look, and sorry, because it's about to get quite technical, at where we are at with the human right to a healthy environment in Scotland. Because there are bits of the right that do exist in theory, and there are other bits that don't yet exist, so let's have a look. But first of all, it's really important to highlight that it is an exciting time for human rights in Scotland. Last month, the Scottish Government's National Human Rights Task Force recommended a new Human Rights Act for Scotland that should include the incorporation of 7 new categories of human rights in Scots law, from rights for disabled people to rights for women and for the environmental sector, the human right to a healthy environment, which we were delighted to see recommended. So let's break down what the human right to a healthy environment means. Now, the first thing to note is that there are 2 sides to the human right to a healthy environment. There's the substantive side, which is not yet part of Scots law, and there's the procedural side, which should be part of Scots law, but is not being fully implemented at the moment. Now, importantly, both sides have been recommended to become part of Scots law by the Human Rights Task Force last month. So what do they mean? Well, the substantive human right to a healthy environment is basically the substance, the meat and bones, the expression that we have a direct human right to a healthy environment. And the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Environment has said that when you break it down, it includes specific rights within it: the right to clean air, a safe climate, access to safe water and adequate sanitation, healthy and sustainably produced food, non-toxic environments in which to live, work, study, and play, and a healthy biodiversity and ecosystem. The takeaway is this is not in law yet. And I want us to just take a moment to reflect on that, because when you think about how basic these needs are and where we're at in the climate crisis, it is really important that we have these legal protections. And we have a chance now with the fact that the task force has recommended this. Then, on the other hand, we have the procedural side. Now, these rights should exist in Scotland because the United Kingdom is party to the Aarhus Convention. And the Aarhus Convention is a regional international law complete with governance structures. Scotland is obliged to comply in the devolved context. Now, the Aarhus rights give the democratic processes, give democratic tools to influence environmental decisions and laws. So again, this is the take the power back argument, that if as citizens we are empowered to hold the powers that be to account on the environment, then this will result in better environmental outcomes. So the three rights that are enshrined by the Aarhus Convention, because there are three, are the right of access to information, which is part of Scots law, the right to participate in environmental decision-making, again, this is part of Scots law, and thirdly, the right of access to legal justice. And this is not part of Scots law fully. And what this means is the right to have access to a court or a tribunal to contest decisions or new laws by the government which go against existing environmental laws. Now, Scotland's legal system has been found to be in breach by the Aarhus governing institutions on access to justice. And the reason for this is because the only way that citizens in Scotland can challenge government decisions is via a process called judicial review. And the thing to know about judicial review is it is extortionate to carry out and very difficult. So just for example, there are many examples, but I'll give one. In 2016, the John Muir Trust lost a judicial review and they were lumped with an initial fee of over £500,000. So it is very, very difficult and very challenging for communities to use judicial review. And we know of a lot of instances where there are good grounds to take a judicial review, but communities just feel that they can't because they're not willing to front the costs. Now, on top of the fact that access to judicial review is very expensive, even once you do get to judicial review, courts, the judges do not really delve into the environmental issues at stake. They're more likely just to consider whether public authorities followed the right steps. So the takeaway here is that because we do not have access to legal justice in Scotland, there is a lack of accountability in Scotland. There have been very few judicial reviews and on environmental issues, that is, in Scotland. And all of the ones that have gone to court have been lost. So the thread of injustice that I was talking about earlier runs through our legal system. A lack of protection, lack of accountability, and the abuse of power. So that is why at the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland, we are trying to make the human right to a healthy environment as strong as it possibly can be. So we're trying to strengthen the law here and here through our advocacy programme. So on the substantive right, on the left-hand side, we're pushing for the new Scottish Government to get moving with the new Human Rights Scotland Act early in the autumn via a pre-legislative consultation. In terms of access to justice, flagged on the right-hand side, we are pushing for Scotland to set up a low-cost, accessible, specialist environmental court, which could handle environmental court cases and be a lot easier to access than judicial review. And where the law is okay in Scotland, we're trying to make a difference with practical support because we know that in practice, it can be very difficult to know what your rights are and how to use them. So we are hoping to soon launch our free advice service where you will be able to ring up and ask our in-house solicitor for advice on your environmental problems. So we're hoping to get that up and running in the coming months, and Shivali can say more about that. And I also want to plug Planning Democracy here because they offer resources and tools to help you know how to access environmental information and how to participate. So that's what we're trying to do. Let's have a look at what difference the human right to a healthy environment could make in practice with an example. So just taking the example of air pollution, let's imagine again, you live in an area where there is a threat that a new motorway is going to be built. So what can you do? Under the status quo, could you access information? Can you get involved? Technically, yes, but it might be a bit intimidating and difficult. Would you be able to go to court if the motorway was approved and was given planning permission? Well, you couldn't currently, because under the current Human Rights Act, we don't have a human right to a healthy environment. And even if you could go to court, would you be able to afford review proceedings? Well, only if you were willing and able to foot potentially a very big bill. Our vision, with a stronger human right to a healthy environment and the support structures in place, would be that you would be able to get information and be involved in the decision-making process, and you could access support via our advice service. If the motorway was given planning permission, you could complain, invoking your human right to a healthy environment. And you would be able to afford review proceedings because Scotland would be fully compliant with the Aarhus Convention, and it would not be extortionate to take out judicial review. So I'm going to finish up now. Just to conclude, the human right to a healthy environment, we believe, will enhance will further environmental justice. But this is by no means guaranteed. So the Human Rights Task Force has recommended the human right to a healthy environment be incorporated into Scots law, but it is important now what happens with this election. So after the election, please contact your new MSPs, spread the word, push for the human right to a healthy environment to be included as part of a new Human Rights Act. So this is what we're going to be pushing for. We're also going to be pushing for a low-cost, accessible environmental court. If you have an environmental problem or campaign that you're involved with, keep us in mind. Hopefully in the coming months, we'll have our advice service up and running so you can access help if you need it. Finally, you can become a member or supporter of the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland, and I've popped the link in here. And a final, you can follow us on Twitter. So I've linked here just to some links that may be of use, and I'm sure the presentation will be circulated after. But I'm going to wrap up here and just prime us for the questions that we're going to be discussing in the breakouts. The first question is, what are the environmental justice concerns for your communities? And the second, how can we support the delivery of the human right to a healthy environment in Scotland? And what can the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland do to support us in this? So thanks very much, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.